All right, we'll go ahead and get going. So Divine Network. So the purpose of Divine Network is first and foremost is to connect Moors back to their original spirituality with their ancestors and their cultures via mental magic. So we also want to educate the community of the importance of nationality and law, educate and provide financial literacy to the community, and also secure community resources. So in this particular video, we're going to focus on financial literacy, right? And so my whole purpose of this video right now is to educate as many people as I can on what lawful money is, what real money is, right? You know, where it can be obtained, and in regards to creating passive income, you know, whether it be networking, real estate, land acquisition, business ownership, right? So everybody's in the rat race right now. We all got jobs. So the only way you really achieve financial freedom is having some passive income to where you don't have to work for somebody every day. So I'm sure everybody can relate to that. And so also building generational family wealth. So, you know, I myself, I don't just want Brandon to be okay, right? I want my whole family to be okay. And so how do we build that family wealth and also protect it at the same time? Excuse me. And so also securing community resources. And when I say community resources, I'm really talking about getting everyone to where we have community gardens. So whether you have a home garden, community garden, everybody has their shelter paid off. So if you just look at what's going on with the political things and the government and all these different benefits being taken away, you're going to have millions and millions of people that, you know, may potentially be out of homes and everything else, you know, food stamps or whatever, when these benefits go away. So it's really, you know, I extend my heart out and I want to get things in place to help my community and other communities. So we'll get right into it. And, you know, we're going to go in on money, right? So lawful money, this is from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, page 1032, and it reads, lawful money, money which is legal tender in payments of debt. Money which is a legal tender in payments of debt. All right, so now let's look at, this is a section from the Constitution of the United States. It's Article 1, Section 10, and Section 10 is powers prohibited of states. So it reads, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payments of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. So you see I have one sentence highlighted there, and it's saying they can't, states are prohibited to make anything but gold and silver a tender in payment of debts, right? And so if that's the case, if gold and silver is the only thing that can pay debts, then that is considered and considered lawful money, right? Okay, Article 1, Section 10. And so one thing that I would ask myself is, how do we end up with the US dollar that we're using today if the Constitution says that states are strictly prohibited from making anything but gold and silver a payment in debts, a tender in debts? Okay, and so what is lawful money? All right, so lawful money is gold and silver. And I don't just want to talk through this and rush through it, so I want to stop here. Is there anything that anybody on the live don't understand about what I just said? Why gold and silver is lawful money? If you understand what I just said, type a yes or give me some hearts or something, just so I know everybody is following me, because I don't just want to talk about this and move on and you really don't understand and understand what it is I'm saying. So type yes if you got me, or why. You see, I'm looking at this on my phone. Okay, not seeing the comments come in. All right. And so one thing I had to ask myself, if the Constitution says that states shall not make anything but gold and silver tender in payments of debts, then I had to ask myself, do they know? Do the states know that they should not make anything but gold and silver a tender payments of debts, right? So let's check this link here. All right. So this is an article I found where states have started making gold and silver tender again in payments of debts. Excuse me, family. Excuse me. All right. So an encouraging victory for sound money has just taken place. And before I get this article is from July 28, 2017. So Louisiana, Utah, and Texas have passed legislation recognizing gold and silver as legal tender, a move that allows citizens to make transactions using precious metals in place of cash, joining 7 other states that have either passed or introduced legislation in favor of other metals. Louisiana, Utah, and Texas are now furthering steps toward establishing regulatory deposits to hold gold and silver. Now it's up to the private sector to accept gold and reintroduce and encourage the use of gold, silver, and forms of payment. Once such transactions become commonplace, the ideal next step would be to enable citizens to use electronic payment systems such as a debit card to make transactions with the metals. Given enough time, these actions may eventually pave the way for other states to adopt gold and silver as legal tender, re-injecting sound money into the American economy. So they know, so re-injecting sound money. Imagine a future where citizens can receive tax returns in the form of gold and silver. If these current developments in favor of sound money are an indication at all, they suggest that the future is not only becoming favorable among some states, but also quite achievable for the entire nation. And so what is looking like that's going on, family, is the nation is moving back to the constitutional foundation that it was built on and reinstating gold and silver as a tender and payment of debts. And that's really, really important. And you'll see why once we really break down the currency we currently use and why it's going to be very, very important for everybody to get gold and silver in their house. So out of those states, showing Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, et cetera, South Carolina. So I'm from South Carolina. The South Carolina House of Representatives passed a bill on April 11, 2013, declaring gold and silver legal tender. All right. So to my family that's here in South Carolina. So now let me get back to this other article. So I thought that was interesting. So what I did, I'm not just taking that article's word for it. I went to this website, Peace Family, Peace. Appreciate y'all coming in. Peace. We're just talking money. So this is the South Carolina State official website. And so I did some research and found the bill of that. And it is section, let's go, 118. And that is 4501. Submit. Check this out, family. So South Carolina is moving back to gold and silver, and also other states. All right. Let's see. So a bill to amend the Code of Laws of South Carolina, 1976, by adding Article 18 to Chapter 1, Title 1, so as to provide that silver and gold coin shall be legal tender in payment of certain debts, right? And so it's still saying it's in committee. I saw another article that said it was passed as well, but here on the site it's not saying pass. So let's view the full text. Let's read what it's talking about here. And so this was in 2010. Excuse me, family. Excuse me. All right. Let's go ahead and read a little bit about what they're saying. Let's start section 1. So Article 18, gold and silver coin is legal tender. The South Carolina General Assembly finds and declares that the state is experiencing an economic crisis of severe magnitude caused in large part by the unconstitutional substitution of Federal Reserve notes for silver and gold coin as legal tender in this state. So what that is saying that the state is recognizing that the current currency that we're using, the Federal Reserve notes, are going to cause some economic crisis at some point, right? But I don't know how many of y'all knew this, but they're not broadcasting this to the public. You know, they're not letting the people know this, right? So the General Assembly also finds and declares that the immediate exercise of the power of the state of South Carolina reserved under Article 1, Section 10, Paragraph 1 of the United States Constitution and by the 10th Amendment is necessary to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the people of this state by guaranteeing to them a constitutional and economically sound monetary system. And so we just read from the Constitution the same thing that the House of Representatives and the state of South Carolina is talking about. So they're moving back to their constitutional foundation, right? So let's see, for the purposes of this article, let's go 1.1, 20. Okay. The term state shall include the state of South Carolina and all executing blah, 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 blah. Let's see. The term gold and silver coin shall include the silver coin and silver and gold coins of the United States, coin or minted, or silver and gold coins of foreign nation adopted as money of the United States by both authority. So this pretty much, and guys, you can Google this. I'm not going to go into all of it. Is South Carolina statehouse.gov. So really, if you're from South Carolina, look this up. In your own state, look this up to see if your state has made any steps towards making gold and silver a legal tender in your state, right? Let's see. Okay. So I ain't going to read all that. All right. So now let's keep rolling. And so just for a quick recap, per the Constitution, lawful money is gold and silver, right? And you have states that are currently moving back and passing these bills, making gold and silver legal tender again. And I'm gonna stop right there. Is there anyone on this live that do not understand or understand what I just went through? That gold and silver is real money. Gold and silver is lawful money. If you understand, hit it. Type yes, yes, yes. Give me some hearts or something. And I'm looking at this on my phone, so it's a little delayed. So. If you do, just type yes, and if I need to come back, I will. All right, so let's keep rolling. So money. What is money? Again, this is from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition, page 1157. Money. In usual and ordinary acceptation, it means gold, silver, or paper money used as a circulating medium of exchange and does not embrace notes, bonds, evidences of debt, or other personal or real estate, right? And so you may be thinking, well, Brandon, we use paper money, right? We use paper money, so we hear you. So what's the point of me getting gold and silver? All right. So the paper money that the Black's Law Dictionary is referring to is gold and silver certificates, right? And so if you look at this, it states at the top, this certificate certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States, $100 in silver. So back in the day, people would take their gold to the bank, deposit it, let them hold it, and they would get gold certificates instead of them lugging around bags and bags of gold or silver, right? And so you had these certificates, and you could take the certificate back to the bank, back to the Treasury, give them the certificate, and you can see at the bottom it says $100 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. So this certificate was money because it was backed by gold, right? And the same thing for silver. You used to have silver certificates. Same thing. This silver certificate certifies that there's on deposit in the Treasury of the United States $1 in silver coin. Again, you could take the certificate to the bank, to the Treasury, and you could acquire and get back $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. Okay. And so, family, what is money? Based on the law, money is gold and silver. Okay? And so again, a quick recap. Per the law, money is gold and silver or paper money. Excuse me. Money is gold and silver or paper money backed by gold and silver. Right? So you had the gold and silver certificates. 1 second, family. Get a little water. Yeah, had a little cold this week, past couple of days, so I'm getting over that. So I apologize for my raspy voice. All right. So I'm gonna ask everybody, if you're watching this live, is this money? This is the currency we use today. Just type a Y, hit a yes, hit a no, depending on what you think. Is this money? You know what I'm saying? Again, I'm looking at people's comments on my phone, so it's a little delayed. So don't think I'm just just being quiet. No, peace, family, peace, Rod. Nope. Anybody else? Is this money? Shall not lawful money? Peace. Anybody else? Rod, fiat currency. That's it, fam. That's it. All right. And so let's get into it. And so Black's Law Dictionary, let's look at that again. It says, in usual and ordinary acceptation, it means gold, silver, or paper money used as circulating medium of exchange and does not embrace notes, bonds, evidences of debt, or other personal or real estate. Right? So you got gold, silver, and paper money used as a circulating medium of exchange, but it does not embrace any notes, bonds, evidences of debt, or other personal or real estate. All right, so let's look at this money, this quote unquote money again, right? And so at the top, it used to say gold or silver certificate, but now it says Federal Reserve note. And we just read the term from Black's Law Dictionary. Money does not embrace any notes, any bonds, evidences of debt, or other personal or real estate. This right here, family, is a Federal Reserve note. So this is not money. This is not money, right? And so a lot of things change. So here where it says Federal Reserve note, that's where it once said gold and silver certificate. It had that stamp here. And at the bottom, it says will pay to the bearer on demand $100, where it used to say they would pay to the bearer, however many dollars in gold or silver you had. But now that's not the case. The only thing you can redeem with this Federal Reserve notes, this fiat currency, is other paper money, right? And so you can only take this to the bank and get different denominations of more paper money, right? And so let's see, I don't know if I can zoom in on this, but here it says the note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable for lawful money at the United States Treasury or at the Federal Reserve Bank. So I find it hard to believe that you can redeem lawful money with this bill because, again, I did some research. Let's go look. Let's go look at the Federal Reserve site itself. Right. And so remember, lawful money is gold. Right. And so on this bill, it's saying this is redeemable in lawful money. Lawful money is gold. So we proved that. And so I just typed in, when I was doing my research, does the Federal Reserve own any gold? Right. And this is straight from their site. And so here it says, does the Federal Reserve own or hold gold? The Federal Reserve does not own gold, right? And so nothing is backing this currency anymore. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 required the Federal Reserve System to transfer ownership of all its gold to the Department of the Treasury. In exchange, the Secretary of the Treasury issued gold certificates that we were just talking about to the Federal Reserve for the amount of gold transferred at the then applicable statutory price for gold held by the Treasury. All right, let's see. Let's talk some more about it. Okay. Small portion. Although the Federal Reserve does not own gold, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York acts as the custodian of gold owned by account holders such as the U.S. government, foreign governments, and other central banks and the official international organizations. No individuals or private sector entities are permitted to store gold in the vault of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or any Federal Reserve Bank. And so they store gold for other people, but they don't own any gold, is what I'm saying. And this is straight from their site, right? And so Nixon, like I said, he removed us from the gold standard, which really made our money or this U.S. dollar unconstitutional at that point, right? And so let's see, how much gold do they really hold? And so they hold gold for the United States. So gold held under earmark at the Federal Reserve Bank for foreign and international accounts is not included in the gold stock of the United States. See table 3.3. Gold stock is valued at. So what this is saying right now, what this is showing, this gold stock is just for how much gold that the U.S. government currently holds. So a little over $11 million of gold at the Federal Reserve. Okay. All right. Well, we know this U.S. dollar ain't backed by gold and is not redeemable for gold. Okay. All right. So what is a note? So you got a Federal Reserve note. What is a note? A note is a unilateral instrument containing an express and absolute promise of signer to pay to a specific person or order or bearer a definite sum of money at a specific time. So essentially what a note is, family, a note is a promise to pay. Right? Does everybody agree? Right? A note is a promise to pay. And so some examples of everyday notes, we got our cars and our houses. And so what we do, we got this nice, beautiful Tahoe sitting right there. We go to the bank and sit down with the banker and we ask them for a loan for, that truck right there is probably $65,000 or $70,000. And so in exchange for, to purchase that car, they give us a loan, right? And they charge you interest, but they give you a specific day of the month that you have to pay your car note and a specific sum that you have to pay your car note. Same thing with a house. You go to the bank, you take out a mortgage, and that's a whole nother subject that we'll cover later, the truth behind mortgages. But anyway, you go and you get a loan. This house right here in this picture, it may be worth, $350,000, you get a house note. You pay a specific sum on a specific day, right? And so you borrow this money for interest. And so the same thing occurs with the government. The government borrows money from the Federal Reserve with interest, right? So those Federal Reserve notes, those are debt notes. Those are loans that our government has taken from the Federal Reserve, right? Excuse me. Excuse me, family. So Federal Reserve notes, another name for a Federal Reserve note is fiat currency. And so again, I like to go to the law dictionary because you can't argue with the law and the Constitution, right? Excuse me. Excuse me. So the terms on the left comes from Black's Law Dictionary, 10th edition, page 465. So you got fiat currency and it says see soft currency. So soft currency is currency not backed by reserves and therefore subject to sharp inflation in value. Also termed fiat currency, fiat money, soft money, see fiat money, under money, right? And so it only makes sense to see what's the opposite of soft currency and hard currency. Currency backed by reserves, especially gold and silver reserves. The value of hard currency can be reliable expected to remain stable or increase, and as such is well traded internationally, right? And so soft currency is the fiat currency. It's the dollars that we use today, right? And so you have the law, and we see it in our everyday lives, and I'll get into that on the next slide. But soft currency, the fiat currency, it fluctuates. It's unstable, right? And hard currency, gold or silver, is stable or it increases in value, right? And so see hard money, see real money on the money, CF fiat money on the money. So fiat money, over here on the right, these three terms come from Black's Law Dictionary, again, the 10th edition, page 1158. So fiat money is paper money that, in contrast, meaning the opposite of hard currency, is not backed by reserves, but instead derives its value from government regulation or law declaring it legal tender. Also termed fiat currency, under currency, CF real money. So real money, money that has metallic or other intrinsic value. Money that has metallic or other intrinsic value, meaning that's gold and silver, as distinguished from paper money, checks and drafts. Also termed hard money. See hard currency on the currency. And so hard money is real money. Hard currency on the currency is the same thing. And so that third definition here is campaign finance law. So that isn't applicable to what I'm talking about right now. But here in the law family, the law is telling you what real money is. Real money is gold and silver. Okay. And then as it relates to the fluctuations, so here is the valuation of the US dollar from 1913, which is the inception of the Federal Reserve, through this chart goes through 2011. And so from 1913 to 2011, the dollar lost approximately 95% of its purchasing power. 95%, right? And we see that every day with buying goods. So if you think about it, you know, I'm sure everybody's had conversations or provocations with their grandparents, and they talk about, you know, when I used to go to the store, I could take $1 and I can get some bread. Excuse me. Excuse me, family. I could get some bread, some eggs, you know, some cookies, milk. You know, they can go in $1 and get everything. Now, $1 won't buy you pretty much nothing. Won't buy you nothing, right? And so the purchasing power of the dollar has diminished over the last 100 years. Okay? And so the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve is a private bank, right? And so since it says federal, a lot of people misconstrue that and think just because it says federal that it's part of the federal government. That is not the case. The Federal Reserve is a private bank owned by private people, right? And so the government has no control over the Federal Reserve. Let me say that again. The government does not have any control over the Federal Reserve. It is a private bank owned by private individuals across the sea, okay? And they are the creditor or lender to the U.S. corporation. Now, what I want to do, we're going to watch a video, and if you can't hear it when it starts, just let me know. I'll drop the YouTube link in the comments if I have to, for people to go back and watch it. But this is a video by Mike Maloney, and what Mike Maloney is going to do is he's going to go in and he's going to break down the Federal Reserve System and how money is actually created. All right, so let me pull this over.
Every college, every bright...
So I've been watching it, so
you make this are about to learn one of the biggest secrets in the history of the world. It's a secret that has huge effects for everyone who lives on this planet. Most people can feel deep down that something isn't quite right with the world economy, but few know what it is. Gone are the days where a family can survive on just one paycheck. Every day it seems things are more and more out of control, yet only 1 in a million understand why. You are about to discover the system that is ultimately responsible for most of the inequality in our world today. The powers that be do not want you to know about this, as this system is what has kept them at the top of the financial food chain for the last 100 years. Learning this will change your life because it'll change the choices that you make. If enough people learn it, it'll change the world because it'll change the system. For this is the biggest hidden secret of money. Never in human history have so many been plundered by so few, and it's all accomplished through this, the biggest scam in the history of mankind. They say that money doesn't grow on trees, but the truth is that the modern banking system creates currency far faster than trees can grow. Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, "Vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will." But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, "Loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest." But what you need to understand is that Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money." The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, "Here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up." Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process, because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on you. The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. The Federal Reserve and the government mistakenly call it base money because they didn't watch episode 1 of this series, and they don't know the difference between money and currency. But I will correctly refer to it as base currency because it is not money. It is currency, and as we've learned, there is a big difference. Money has to be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government. And the politicians say, hey, thanks for that. And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out at a profit, of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranky, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created, called bank credit, in its place. Now I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, they are still currency. So now there is $190 in existence. Now, the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned to him from your account, and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account, and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio, an initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits, it's 10%, on others, it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits, reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely a symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers. Some of them printed, most of them typed, and there is nothing else. But if you thought that was crazy, Get ready to enter the twilight zone of modern economics. We work for some of that currency supply. True wealth is your time, but we trade away moments of our lives, hour by hour, day by day, and year by year, for numbers that somebody printed on pieces of paper or just typed into a computer. Now those numbers represent our blood, sweat, tears, labor, ideas, and talent. We are what gives the currency its value. But here comes the really cruel joke. We work hard so that we can save some of that currency, so that we can pay the tax collector in the United States, it's known as the IRS. They then turn it over to the Treasury so that the Treasury can pay the principal plus interest on that bond that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. Now let's do a recap on this section, because this is where the system begins to rob you and I on a massive scale. Much of our taxes are not used for schools, roads, and public services, but to pay interest on bonds that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. The Federal Reserve is committing fraud. But here's one of the biggest secrets of them all. Before the establishment of the Federal Reserve, there was no need for personal income tax. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913.
Income tax is interest, fam. Interest on the loan.
Was amended to allow income tax. Do you really think this was just a coincidence? Ask yourself how much income tax you've paid over your lifetime. Much of it has been silently siphoned away into the hands of those who own the system. Yes, this system has owners. Who they are is an even bigger secret that we'll get to shortly. But first, we need to understand the mumbo-jumbo of the so-called debt ceiling. It's all based on a huge paradox. There was interest due on that bond, and there was interest due on every one of those loans that the banks made. That means that there is interest due on every dollar in existence. Let me ask you something. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that one into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there are $2 in existence, but you owe $4, and so on and so on. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. There is always more debt in the system than there is currency in existence to pay the debt. Therefore, the whole system is impossible. It is finite. It will come to an end one day. What would happen if the government stopped borrowing to do deficit spending? Are the payments on those treasury bonds going to stop? What would happen if the public stopped borrowing and going deeper into debt? Are your house and car payments going to stop? No. There is a payment due every month on the principal plus the interest on every dollar in existence, and those payments do not stop. If we stop borrowing, then no new currency is created to replace the currency that we used to make those payments. Whether you're making a payment on a loan or paying tax to make a payment on a bond, the portion of the payment that goes to pay off the principal extinguishes that portion of the debt. But the debt also extinguishes the currency. Currency and debt are like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other. If we just pay off the principal only on all the loans and bonds that exist, the entire currency supply just vanishes. So if we don't go deeper into debt every year, look what happens. The whole thing goes into a deflationary collapse under the weight of those payments. Politicians and pundits alike talk about balancing the budget, paying down the debt, and living within our means. They don't understand that that is deflationary. It is impossible to do under our current monetary system without collapsing the whole economy. This is why any talk of a debt ceiling is not only ridiculous, it's delusional. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt just to continue. And that's why politicians will always kick the can down the road and raise this so-called debt ceiling over and over again until the whole system finally collapses under its own weight. In other words, they don't want it to collapse on their watch. The founding fathers of the United States knew the dangers of central banking and fought to free themselves from this very thing. The Revolutionary War started out as a tax revolt. But now we must pay tax just to have a monetary system. Having just suffered through the hyperinflation of the continental dollar, which was printed into oblivion to finance the Revolutionary War, they understood the dangers of fiat currency and debt-based monetary systems. So to protect future generations from institutional theft and out-of-control government, they wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver can be money, for the simple fact that you can't print them. Our current system is not only unconstitutional, but it robs us of the liberty and prosperity our forefathers fought and died for. We are all feeling the effects of ignoring the Constitution right now. By forcing more currency into circulation, our purchasing power is diluted. Inflation is a slow and insidious stealth tax that is simply the result of this debt-based monetary system. This system empowers and benefits those who create the currency and receive it first, as they get to spend it into circulation before it has an effect on the economy. They're stealing purchasing power from you and transferring it to the banks and the government every hour of every day because of this false monetary system. And it's not like the people at the top don't know this. To quote the Federal Reserve, the decrease in purchasing power incurred by the holders of money due to inflation imparts gains to the issuers of money. This is a fraud. It is a pyramid scheme, it is a Ponzi scheme, it's a scam, and it's a lie. Our entire monetary system is nothing but a form of legalized theft. But here's the biggest con job of them all. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It has stockholders. There is no federal agency that has stockholders. What's a stockholder? A share of stock represents a percentage of ownership in a corporation. So the stockholders are the owners of that corporation. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is a private corporation with owners. And you can see it for yourself if you go to the Federal Reserve's website, and it will say the stockholders receive an annual dividend of 6%. Now, we know that the stock in the Federal Reserve was originally issued to the largest banks in the United States. But because of mergers and acquisitions through the years, you can't actually trace who owns the stock in the Federal Reserve. That's a very closely guarded secret. My guess would be that the owners are those primary dealers, the banks that get to make a profit by selling part of our national debt, those bonds, to the Federal Reserve, who buys them with a check from nothing. Then we pay tax to pay the principal and the interest on those bonds so that the Federal Reserve can pay the banks a 6% dividend. Don't be alarmed if you don't quite comprehend the deception of this system at first glance. Very few people do. It is purposely complex. The economist John Maynard Keynes once wrote, "By this means, government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft." I believe that presented correctly, anyone can understand this system, regardless of how complex it is. So let's do a recap and break it down even more. The way the system works is that, step one, the government creates glorified IOUs. These bonds increase our national debt and put the public on the hook to pay it back. Step two, IOUs are swapped to create currency. The Treasury sells the bonds to the banks. The banks then turn around and sell our national debt at a profit to the Federal Reserve, which they probably own. The Federal Reserve then opens its checkbook that doesn't have a penny in it and buys those IOUs with IOUs that it writes, checks, on a checking account that has a zero balance. Then they give those checks to the banks and currency just springs into existence. And then the whole process repeats. This results in a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury, which is really just a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the numbers in the various branches of the government, and we get to step three. The government spends the numbers on promises, public works, social programs, and war. Then the government employees, contractors, and soldiers deposit their pay into the banks, and we get to step four, where the banks multiply the numbers by magically inventing more IOUs through fractional reserve lending, where they steal a portion of everyone's deposit and lend it out. That currency gets redeposited, and then a portion is stolen again. And the process repeats over and over, magnifying the currency supply exponentially. Then we work for some of those numbers, which brings us to step five, where our numbers are taxed. We pay tax to the IRS, who then turns our numbers over to the Treasury, so the Treasury can pay the principal plus the interest on bonds that were purchased by the Federal Reserve with a check from nothing. Then we get to step 6, the debt ceiling delusion. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt and will eventually collapse under its own weight because politicians always kick the can down the road. They don't want it to collapse on their watch. And finally, step 7, the secret banks take their cut. The world's largest banks own the Federal Reserve. Those banks make a profit selling our national debt to the Fed. They make a profit when the Fed pays them interest on the reserves held at the Fed, and the Fed pays them a 6% dividend on their ownership of the Fed. This system is fundamentally evil. It funnels wealth from the working population to the government and the banking sector. It is the cause of the artificial booms and busts of modern economies, and it causes great disparity of wealth between the rich and the working class. And it is only possible because we no longer use real money, we use currency. But worst of all, it is a form of enslavement. Bond is the root word of bondage. Whenever a government issues a bond, it is a promise to make us pay tax in the future. Nobody asked you if you wanted to pay tax today for the prosperity we all enjoyed in the last century. Nobody is asking our children if they want to work hard in the future to pay for the prosperity we're enjoying now. George Washington once wrote to James Madison, "No generation has the right to contract debts greater than can be paid off during the course of its own existence." By stealing prosperity from tomorrow so we can spend it today, we enslave ourselves and future generations. Now this all sounds pretty bad, but there is great hope, for you are the greatest threat to this false monetary system. This system relies on the public being ignorant of its workings. Please share this knowledge with everyone you know, because an informed public that fully understands the system can build a better future for generations to come. And now I leave you with this quote, widely attributed to a former director of the Bank of England. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in inequity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money and control credit, and with the flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. But if you want to continue as the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create money and to control credit. This is the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. It's located on Constitution Street, and that is just as much of a joke as the New York Fed being located on Liberty Street. Both of them are unconstitutional, both of them limit our liberty, and they transfer wealth away from us every second of every day, to the Federal Reserve, to the government, and to the banking sector. You are now among the 1 in a million who can detect the theft of your prosperity. So the big question is, what can you do about it? 1. Watch this video until you can describe and teach it to others. Those who understand this system can make preparations for its unavoidable collapse and protect themselves. History shows that those who don't will probably be wiped out. 2. Share this video with everyone, especially those you care about. All it takes is a mouse click or two to get this message in front of millions. Post this video on Facebook, tweet it, email it to loved ones. Please share it wherever you can. 3. Join the conversation. The current world monetary system is based on a 300-year-old design meant to enrich a few at the expense of the many. There must be a better way. At hiddensecretsofmoney.com, we've created an open source platform.
All right, so excuse me. So we'll stop there right there. But I hope that everybody got the gist of what's going on there. So just to recap on what we learned thus far on that particular section. So per law, the U.S. dollar is a debt currency and has no value. Per law, gold and silver is real money and is stable and or increases in value. So we just saw from Mike Maloney, who he describes that better than any video that I've seen, the Federal Reserve System is a debt system, right? And our income tax, that federal tax that you see on your check, that goes to pay the interest on government loans. And they tell you, yeah, it goes to do the roads. Nah, that's what your state tax is for, because each state is its own country, and that's another video, more research to do. But your income tax, your federal income tax, goes to pay off the interest on federal loans, right? Okay, so let's keep going through it. All right, and so Black's Law Dictionary, I'm gonna stay on that for a minute. Black's Law Dictionary states that money does not embrace any notes, bonds, evidences of debt, or any other or personal or real estate. So bonds, you just saw Mike Maloney talking about the treasury bonds. So what is a treasury bond? A treasury bond is a marketable fixed interest of U.S. government debt security with a maturity of more than 10 years. Treasury bonds make interest payments semi-annually, and the income received is only taxed at the federal level. Treasury bonds are known in the market as primarily risk-free, and they are issued by the U.S. government with very little risk of default. So the government out here selling debt, right? And they have been doing so since the creation. So they selling debt. So a treasury bond, a T-bond, is essentially someone being able to buy the government debt. Okay, and who holds the most T-bonds, right? So this is a list. I got it from Business Insider. You can Google that if you want to, but that's my source. And so at the top of the list, you got Japan and China, Ireland, Cayman Islands, Brazil, Switzerland, Luxembourg, United Kingdom, UK, Taiwan, Hong Kong. And so I think it was maybe 19 that this particular site gave me, but I just did the top 10. And so you got Japan and China, and those two are interesting to me because they own the most government debt, and we out here picking a fight with them. So what happens when these countries, when they decide to liquidate their T-bonds? So when they don't want to hold on to these T-bonds anymore and they decide to liquidate them, the government has to pay them whatever monies they are owed on that investment, right? So that's that, and we'll see more of that later in the video of why that's so important, and that this is already taking place, that different countries are already liquidating their bonds, right? And so just a quick recap, multiple countries around the world own the U.S. debt via these T-bonds, right? Now, does everybody have a good understanding of where we're at thus far? Right, everything that we went over, the U.S., from the dollar to these bonds, the government is built on debt right now. It's built on debt. Is there anything or any questions that anybody have, or something that you don't understand before we move on? And I'll try to clarify it as best as possible. So I'm gonna give it a few seconds. I'm looking at it on my phone, so it's kind of delayed. And if you're just getting in, you'll have to catch the playback. If you're jumping in the middle of it. Peace, you good? More out, Rob. Peace, family, peace. Anybody else? Everybody good? I want to make sure everybody understands it. All right, we'll keep going. So again, money does not embrace any notes, bonds, evidences of debt, or other personal or real estate, right? So let's look here. Does not embrace any evidences of debt. This is the U.S. debt clock for the U.S. nation, the nation of the U.S. So 21, almost $22 trillion in debt. So that alone speaks for itself. And I'm doing this because the law tells you that money does not embrace any notes, bonds, evidences of debt. So anything that the government is churning out right now, it is not sound money. It is not sound money. Right, and that's what I'm trying to bring home. That's what I want everybody to really internalize, that it's built on debt. Everything is built on debt, and if you don't have gold and silver, you're going to be in a bad place And I can't say the time or when it's going to happen, when the system is going to fall, but it is going to happen at some point. All right. And so now let's do this. Check out this next link. So the national debt. National debt of the United States is a debt or unpaid borrowed funds carried by the federal government of the United States, which is measured. It was a key that I wanted to pull out of here, and I did not put the note. Oh, here it is. So there's two types of components to the national debt. So you got the $22 trillion, right? And so there's two sides of it. There's the public debt, and then there's what they call the intra-government debt or the at-home debt, right? So you got the public debt that's outside, where we borrow money from other countries, et cetera, et cetera. And then you got the in-house debt that the government owes to the people, right? And so one thing that's interesting is the Social Security, right? And so debt held by the public, such as Treasury securities or T-bonds, bonds and securities are pretty much the same thing, held by investors outside the federal government, including those held by individuals, corporations, the Federal Reserve System, and foreign, state, and local governments. So not only are they creating them, the Federal Reserve own these. So excuse me. So you just looked at that in that video, but it's just interesting, man. It's just going round and round and round, and like I said, only a few people are coming up off of it. Why we the people are suffering through inflation, cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. We're getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. So debt held by the government accounts or intra-government debt are non-marketable Treasury securities held in accounts or programs administered by the federal government, such as the Social Security Trust Fund. Debt held by the government accounts represents the cumulative surpluses, including interest earnings and various government programs that have been invested in Treasury securities. And so I could not help but click this to see what would come up. So the federal old age, this is a Social Security Trust Fund, Wikipedia. The federal old age and survivors insurance trust fund and the federal disability insurance trust fund, collectively the Social Security Trust Fund or trust funds, are trust funds that provide for payment of Social Security benefits administered by the United States Social Security Administration. The Social Security Administration collects payroll taxes and uses the money to pay old age survivors and disability insurance benefits by way of trust funds. When the program runs a surplus, the excess funds increase the value of the trust fund. At the end of 2014, the trust fund contained 2.9 trillion, up 25 billion from 2013. The trust fund is required by law to be invested in non-marketable securities issued, and that's just government debt again, those T-bonds, issued and guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the federal government. These motherfuckers, excuse my language, but these motherfuckers ain't got no credit. Everything that we looked at is debt. So the government don't have any credit. So just keep that in mind. The full faith and credit, they don't have any credit. They in debt up to their ears. These securities earn a market rate of interest. Excess funds are used by the government for non-Social Security purpose. All right, I'm gonna read that again. So it says excess funds in the Social Security is used for a non-Social Security purpose. So we paying money out our checks again. So you got the Federal Reserve taxes that you pay that you thought was going to fix the roads and shit like that, and then they taking Social Security and using it for non-Social Security purposes, creating the obligations to the Social Security Administration and thus program recipients. However, Congress could cut these obligations by altering the law. Trust fund obligations are considered intra-government debt, a component of the public or national debt. Okay. There's one more thing that I wanted to read. Yeah, the structure. So the Social Security trust fund comprises two separate funds that hold federal government debt obligations related to what are traditionally thought of as Social Security benefits. The larger of these funds is the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, which holds in trust special interest-bearing federal government securities bought with surpluses, payroll taxes, tax revenues. The second, smaller fund is Disability Insurance Trust Fund, which holds in trust more of the special interest-bearing federal government securities bought with surplus DI payroll taxes. And so this was the interesting piece that for me is this section here. So what this states is the trust funds run surpluses in the amount paid in by current workers is more than the paid out benefit to current beneficiaries. These surpluses are given to the U.S. Treasury and thus become part of the general federal budget in exchange for special U.S. government securities, which are deposited into the trust funds. If the trust begins running deficits, meaning more in benefits are paid out than the contributions are paid in, the Social Security Administration is empowered to redeem the securities and use those funds to cover the deficit. So what that essentially means, family, is you have these millions and millions of people that are paying into their Social Security, right? And so they may not be using it yet. They might not be tapping into it, but you have so many people paying into this Social Security trust. So what they're saying that is when they have a surplus, and for example, let's say, and I'm just using a random number, let's say in 1 year, they receive $5 million, right? And this is just an example. They receive $5 million, but our grandparents and other people that are getting their Social Security only equates to 3 million, right? 5 million, 3 million. They'll take that difference, the 2 million, and go use it for other shit. They'll put it in the general spending fund. So it's all crooked, you know what I'm saying, in a way, and they replace it with treasury bonds, and that's nothing but government debt, which supposedly they take interest. So, but it's all, the whole system is built on debt. And that's what I just really want everybody to understand, that it's built on debt. It's debt on top of debt. All right, so let me get off of that. All right. Let's go back. Went too far. So quick recap. U.S. corporations is trillions of dollars in debt. Most people know that by watching TV. Social Security benefits. I skipped something that was very important. Family. Hold on. Let me back up. I was reading too fast. So I'm going to read this section right here. All right. So according to Social Security trustees who oversee the program and report on its financial condition, program costs are expected to exceed non-interest income from 2010 onward. However, due to interest, the program will run on over surplus that adds to the fund through the end of 2019. Under current law, the securities in the trust fund represent a legal obligation the government must honor when program revenues are no longer sufficient to fully fund benefit payments. However, when the trust fund is used to cover program deficits in a given year, the trust fund balance is reduced. By 2034, the trust fund is expected to be exhausted. Thereafter, payroll taxes are projected to only cover approximately 79% of obligations. So this is a key sentence that I wanted to read. By 2034, the trust fund is expected to be exhausted. So, and I'm going to do some more digging on that because I know a lot of people say Wikipedia isn't a valid source. So I'm going to do some more digging on that. But what they're saying here is by 2034, Social Security is expected to be exhausted. No longer here. So, okay. And Excuse me. So this is another article I found. And the only thing that I really wanted to pull out of here, it says the U.S. was born in debt. The earliest full reckoning of the U.S. national debt was complied by Alexander Hamilton, the first U.S. Treasury, who was sort of like a Nat Silver of his era. And really, the biggest thing, and if you remember from the video we watched from Mike Maloney talking about the Federal Reserve System, I just wanted to point out that the Continental Congress had other money that they printed out. So here, where did that debt come from? Well, the Continental Congress, the rough equivalent of the federal government in Revolution era America, lacked the power to tax. It first tried to pay for stuff by printing money. Again, just printing. And that's the same thing that the Federal Reserve is doing right now, just printing money. So this currency, known as the Continental, collapsed. So that's what I wanted to highlight from this particular article when I was reading it, is that printing money has failed in this country before, right? So the same thing the Federal Reserve is doing now, printing money, and it's not backed by any assets. It has collapsed in this country before, and it will happen again. Okay? All right. Let's try to get through it. So quick recap. U.S. corporation is trillion of dollars in debt. The Social Security benefits are forecasted to be exhausted by 2034. Social Security funds are used for non-Social Security purposes. The federal government spends excess Social Security funds not paid to current beneficiaries. Excess printing of fiat currency has failed in this country before via the Continental collapse. Okay, excuse me. Now, so if everybody remember, we had the 2008 economic crisis, and that was the last downturn, and really considered the worst economic disaster since the Great Depression of 1929. And so what happened is you had these mortgage-backed securities, these faulty securities that were issued, and really you had these low interest rates that people were getting. So they got these homes, they could afford them when they first got them, and then the interest rates went up, and all of a sudden, boom, they couldn't afford them. So you had millions of people that defaulted on these mortgage-backed securities on their homes, right? And so the banks knew this would happen. They knew it. If you haven't, watch a movie called The Big Short. That is a great movie that really talks about what happened in 2008. The Big Short. Watch this. It's a great movie, right? And so in order to not crash the world economy, banks had to be bailed out, right? And that money came from us, whether it was for more taxes, inflation, because the only thing that the government did was printing more money. And so when you just print more money, the value of that currency decreases that much more, right? And so the bailouts had to happen because the world economy would have crashed in 2008. And the reason being is because the U.S. dollar is currently the world's reserve currency. So they had to bail out the banks. And so what is a reserve currency? A reserve currency is a currency a reserve currency is a large quantity of currency maintained by central banks and other major financial institutions to prepare for investments, transactions, and international debt obligations, or to influence their domestic exchange rate. A large percentage of commodities such as gold and oil are priced in the reserve currency, causing other countries to hold this currency to pay for these goods. So essentially, the reserve currency, so the U.S. is the reserve currency, and it mentioned two prominent commodities or assets, which is gold and oil. So countries all across the world hold millions and millions of dollars of U.S. Dollars in their reserves, so they can do an exchange and do commerce for gold and oil. Okay. Okay, we just talked about what is a reserve currency. And so from here, I wanted to read this article because it describes how the U.S. became the world's currency. So the post-war emergence of the U.S. as the predominant economic power had enormous implications for the global economy. At one time, its GDP represented 50% of the world's output. So it was only made sense that the U.S. dollar would become the global currency reserve. In 1944, following the Bretton Woods Agreement, delegates from 44 nations formally agreed to adopt the U.S. dollar as an official reserve currency. Since then, other countries pegged their exchange rates to the dollar, which was convertible to gold at the time. Because the gold-backed dollar was relatively stable, it enabled other countries to stabilize their countries. All right, so what that is saying, in 1944, the U.S. dollar was still backed by gold. So since it was still backed by gold, it was still considered money. It was still considered stable, right? And so what the world did is said, okay, since we have the U.S. dollar is stable, it's backed by gold, it's dependable. Let's back up our fiat currencies with the U.S. dollar because it's stable, right? And so that's what that means. So in the beginning, the world benefited from a strong and stable dollar, and the United States prospered from the favorable exchange rate on its currency. The foreign governments did not fully realize that although their currency reserves were backed by gold reserves, the United States could continue to print dollars that were backed by its treasury debt. As the United States printed more money to finance its spending, the gold backing behind the dollar diminished. The continued printing of money beyond the backing of gold reserves reduced the value of the currency reserves held by foreign governments. And so what that's saying is, although the dollar was still backed by gold, since the excuse me, family, since the Federal Reserve continued to print, it diminished or was diminishing the value of the currency that these other nations were holding, and they weren't trying to hear it. So as the United States continued to flood the markets with paper dollars to finance its escalating war in Vietnam and the Great Society programs, the world grew cautious and began to convert dollar reserves into gold. And so once these governments found out that, okay, the Federal Reserve is printing money, they knew that the reserve currencies that they were holding were decreasing in value. So what they started doing was exchanging their U.S. dollars to get their gold back, right? The run on gold was so extensive that President Nixon was compelled to step in and decouple the dollar from the gold standard, which gave way to the floating exchange rates we see today. Soon after, the value of gold tripled and the dollar began its decades-long decline. Let's see. The U.S. dollar remains the world's currency reserve due primarily to the fact that countries accumulated so much of it, and it was still the most stable liquid form of exchange. Backed by the safest of all paper assets, U.S. Treasuries, the dollar is still the most redeemable currency for facilitating world commerce. In 2010, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development released a report suggesting the development of a global currency to replace the dollar as the world's dominant reserve currency because of the instability of its value in the global market. That is very, very critical, family. So the United Nations met, and they are looking and finding other ways to replace the dollar. And so, and you'll see more of that when we talk about inflation. But what that does, if they find a new currency to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency, that is going to be a whole lot of supply. And so all those dollars are going to come flooding back to the U.S., And so you're going to have a lot of supply, but no demand. And so when you have a surplus of supply and not the demand, I mean, the value of the dollar is going to go to absolutely nothing. And that's really, really not what we want to see. But it's happening. It's happening. All right, so but that's yet to change as the dollar remains the world's official reserve currency and is still most held. The euro, introduced in 1999, is the second most commonly held reserve currency. And in October 2016, the International Monetary Fund declared China's renminbi as an official reserve currency. So China is making a lot of moves, and we'll get into that on the next slide. Okay. So is there anything that anyone does not get about what I just said? And so really, let's look at the timeline, family. So you had the crash in 2008, right? And all this bailout, all this extra money had to be printed to keep the world economy from falling. All right. So that's 2008. In 2010, the United Nations got together to discuss and developing a new reserve currency to replace the dollar. In 2011, the states, and I can speak for South Carolina in particularly, started, having meetings and making the steps to reinstate gold and silver as a legal tender. So just look at the timeline. So once the United Nations had this meeting, the year after, the state of South Carolina and other states started having meetings and passing bills to reinstate gold and silver as a form of legal tender. So just pay attention to the narrative, family. I'm just trying to share this information so everybody can see what's really going on. All right. So now, one thing that is very important to note as well is countries are acquiring more and more gold. Right. All right. So here's another article. Here in the United States, if you start talking too much about gold and silver, many of the locals quickly look at you like you're wearing a tinfoil hat and searching for aliens. So really what this article talks about, I'm not going to read all this, but I'm going to jump down, because while gold and silver may not be popular on Wall Street, it's interesting to consider that many of the biggest players in the global market have a much different view. It's not a given that the world will keep buying U.S. debt at the same levels, regardless of American policies and the shifting perceptions of U.S. political and economic power. The Russian and Turkish flight into gold could be a precursor of bigger global shifts. And so what's going on, family, on a larger scale is you have several countries that are they are liquidating their treasury bonds, and we'll pull up some articles there too that further explains that. They're liquidating their treasury bonds and they are replacing those T-bonds with gold, right? And so in addition to documenting Turkey's and Russia's move away from the dollar, the Miles Frank blog has offered plenty of commentary about how much gold China has been buying, as well as how countries like Hungary, Germany, and others have also repatriated their gold in recent years. Okay, and so I'm not going to read all this, but really, family, what it's talking about is the world is moving away from the dollar, and it's not going to all happen at one time. They can't do it at one time because the dollar is so embedded in commerce. But I just want to point out that they are taking the steps, right? And so if governments are taking the steps and getting gold and silver back in their possession, what do you think we as people need to be doing? We as people need to be getting gold and silver in our possession, right? Because there's going to be a shift. There's going to be a change. Excuse me. All right, and I just want to let's see how much gold China has been buying, because China is like the rival of the U.S. right now with this trade war and everything else. So much speculation abounds regarding China's gold holdings. They officially claimed 1,054 tons in April of 2019. It's suspected they may re-announce their holdings again last year at this time, as it was 5 years after the last announcement, and China has a habit of 5-year plans. Alasdair McLeod believes that they have 20,000 tons or more, which very well may be the case. I can easily make a case that their holdings are far in excess of 10,000 tons just from the data since 2009. So it's looking that China could have anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 tons of gold. Okay, let's look at another article. And again, and I'm sorry if this is not the most entertaining to most people, but knowing what real money is and looking at this on a grand scale and knowing what's going on is important to me. So forgive me if I'm boring you. All right. So this is another article. This is from Bloomberg. So it says why Russia and Turkey are such gold bugs. Their moves out of U.S. debt and into precious metal could be a precursors of a bigger global shift. And this is from just last year, June 27, 2018. So family, listen to what I'm saying. Countries are making this shift, right? And if people aren't making this shift, we're going to be in a bad place. So since December 2017, Russia has cut its holdings of U.S. foreign debt by more than half. So this is what I was talking about, family. So Russia has liquidated, and it may be more now, Russia has liquidated more than 50% of its treasury bonds, the U.S. debt of those T-bonds, right? Instead, it's been increasing the share of gold in its international reserves. That's understandable behavior for a country that has to deal with the unpredictable U.S. sanctions policies, but it's also part of a trend. Foreign governments and international organizations account for a decreasing share of outstanding U.S. debt, and some economies have in recent years aggressively upped the share of gold in their reserves instead. And so I'm not going to read all of this, but I really just wanted to point out that again, you have countries that are getting rid of U.S. debt, and replacing these T-bonds, and let's look at this short video, and they're replacing their T-bonds. They're getting rid of them.
This is an ad for a project management tool called Monday.com. This is what it looks like, and this is what it feels like. Keeping tabs on what's happening with U.S. treasuries across the globe, we have several countries definitely dumping the U.S. treasuries. Now, the reason and the issue behind this, not clear, is there's speculation as to why each and every country is doing what it's doing. This is why I always revert back to calling this the world stage and their theaters of war and everything else they have going on out here. But in terms of this, in the U.S. stocks, what we're seeing here is the dumping of these treasuries. They're liquidating a record amount of U.S. stocks.
Record amount.
Now, when you're doing this together with other countries, this can definitely affect whoever you're trying to hone in on. This time, it's the U.S. and the U.S. dollar. The stock market, the treasuries, everything affected here as it's being dragged down. And when we take a look at who the two biggest players in terms of buying U.S. treasuries are, it is Japan and China. Of all countries. So they're out here trying to show everyone that this is some kind of tariff war and on the verge of this big war with China, but yet they are vital out here as to what was going on. If they really wanted to start dumping in like super mass amounts in a real war type of atmosphere, just liquidate everything, then you would see a massive shift, but we haven't seen that. They've started to liquidate, but it's been smaller chunks. Now, Russia stepped up. They did the same thing. Saudi Arabia stepped up and surprised a lot. They did the same thing in dumping U.S. treasuries. So this has happened across the board. And if there ever was a plan to try to bring down the dollar and usher in something new, well, you would start to see signs, I would believe, something similar to what we're seeing here, where you see moves being made across the board by multiple countries that affect it all in all. And I foresee a lot of other moves coming into play, big dumps that will really start to push things into motion. But it's all about timing at this point. And it's all about the global business. You have to remember that a lot of these countries are taking in goods from the United States. So just cutting them off, of everything
would leave them hurting, especially if they're trying to take in a majority of their food or majority of whatever it is. If they're getting it from the United States, they're going to have to make sure that base is covered and that they're getting that somewhere else, or else it's just not going to be feasible for them. So what I'm noticing here is there's a lot of these world leaders meeting up, dressing up in purple robes, wearing pins in the same location, and doing a lot of secretive talk behind the curtain, and then the mainstream media just tells you what they want. I'm here telling you, you better beware of world leaders selling you all out through and through every country to usher in a true world order where they all continue to keep their seat, keep their power, or the ones in charge of a country that collapses, they'll just flee into hiding. And it all...
All right, so that's pretty much all of that. But I wanted to play that video. It was a short video, but if you're not familiar with markets and all that, that chart may not make a lot of sense to you. But I really want you to take in what he was saying, that you have multiple countries that are liquidating their T-bonds, right? And so when countries liquidate their bonds, the government has to pay that out. So whatever funds that when they bought these T-bonds, whether it was X amount of dollars, the U.S. government, which is already $22 trillion in debt, they have to pay those countries whatever those T-bonds are worth when they want to liquidate them. So just think about the impact that they could have on our economy here in the U.S. as these countries liquidate their T-bonds, right? So you have a government that's already bankrupt, that's already in debt, and you have to pay out more money, pay money that you don't have. So in order to pay these people, they're gonna have to give them gold, right? They're gonna have to give them gold. They have to pay them in gold. All right, and so this is another big article. The almighty dollar is U.S. dominance in the oil trade waning as China begins using RMB for payment. And so I'm not going to read this whole article, but essentially what this article is talking about is China and all the other countries on, on that side of the world are using RMB. They're pretty much using a different currency outside of the U.S. dollar to do commerce. So before, as you saw with the reserve, since the U.S. was the world's reserve currency, everybody held U.S. dollars, and to buy oil and to exchange oil from country to country, they were using the U.S. dollars. But that's not the case anymore. So China has come up with RMB, and they have found alternate currencies, alternate methods to exchange oil, right? And so now what that does is that cuts the U.S. dollar out. That cuts the U.S. dollar out of that trading, and it also that demand is not as strong. So all those U.S. dollars that people were currently holding to do commerce and to trade oil, that shit is going to come back. And so again, like I said, supply and demand. So you got this large supply, this large quantity of U.S. dollars that's going to come flooding back to the U.S., and the demand isn't going to be there. So again, the dollar is only valued, purchasing power is only around 3 cents right now. It's only around 3 cents. So once that starts to happen, what is it going to go to? 2 cents, 1 cent, a half a cent, and then down to zero. And so if you're not familiar with what that looks like, look at Venezuela for an example. That's what a crashed economy looks like. It's been a while since we have experienced any real economic troubles in our lifetime. So 1929 wasn't that long ago, the Great Depression, where you pretty much had everybody in the suit line, right? We have gotten comfortable, and we don't think that can happen again, which is a very real reality. Peace, Gerald. Peace. Yeah, and they can, but I don't disagree with that. So they have the right to borrow, but still it's up to the people. I don't know if you saw the beginning or caught it back. Really, what I'm trying to bring home is people. We need to see that gold and silver is real money at the end of the day. And so what I'm really trying to bring home for everybody, that is when the Federal Reserve System collapses, what do you want to be holding? Do you want to be holding Federal Reserve notes? Do you want to be holding debt notes? Or do you want to be holding gold and silver so you can still do commerce out here? Right? So that's what I'm trying to bring home. Okay. All right. So now, just a quick recap. The U.S. dollar again is a debt. The U.S. dollar debt currency is currently the world reserves currencies. Countries are removing the U.S. dollar as the reserves and replacing with gold. Countries are some are doing it fast, some are taking their time. Excuse me, but they are liquidating their U.S. Treasury bonds. And countries are finding alternate currencies to do international trading. So that's cutting the U.S. and cutting the U.S. dollar out of international trade. Okay. And so now I want to look at gold reserves. So right now, United States is at the top, stating that we currently hold a little over 8,000 tons. Germany, a little over 3,000, so forth and so on. So China, you're looking at a little over almost 1,800, but that's up in the air because the article we just read a little while ago said they could have anywhere up towards 10 to 20,000 tons of gold, right? And China is making the moves to back their currency will be backed by that gold. That's another thing, and I don't know if I touched on that as long as I should have, but China is moving to reinstate the gold standard to their currency over in China. So one thing that's interesting is Fort Knox. I read a couple articles. Like I said, I don't just read one article when I'm researching this kind of stuff, but read a couple articles and it stated that Fort Knox, where in Fort Knox, Kentucky, where a lot of where our gold is housed, has not been audited since 1953. Right. So the amount of gold that's shown here could vary to the good or to the bad. Who knows? Yep. Exactly, Gerald. Peace, man. Yeah, haven't been backed by gold since 1933. But it's important, to watch the moves that the governments are making, and the states. And when I finish, you can go back and watch the beginning. The states are starting to reinstate gold and silver as a legal tender in payments of debts, and so that's an important key. But yeah, you're right, brother. Peace, man. Gold standard been gone since 1933, and so one thing that I wanted to read, I'm gonna read a little bit from this book. It's called "Fruit from a Poisonous Tree," and this book was written by he's an ex-CIA agent. He was in the military. He was etc. So he has an extensive record. So and it's page 152, "Fruit from a Poisonous Tree." And it says, "Where is money gold from Fort Knox?" So investigating into the robbery of Fort Knox. So my research uncovered the following information that was never intended by the government to be revealed ever. What you're about to discover will shock and anger the average hardworking taxpaying American. I know it did me. The law requires the Secretary of Treasury submit to Congress a report on the amount and value of gold held in the vaults at Fort Knox each year. Yet the Secretary has issued no report in the last 25 years. No person has been allowed to view the contents of the vaults at Fort Knox, and no audit of the gold supplies belonging to the U.S. Treasury can be found for at least the last 25 years. The government is covering up the fact that Fort Knox has been systematically looted, right? So what he's saying is the government have not been reporting or has not allowed anyone to audit the gold that's currently stored at Fort Knox, right? Here you go, Gerald. Peace, man. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt penned executive orders that confiscated all privately held gold, and that did so without compensation, right? And why he said they did so without compensation is because Americans were, gold was outlawed as a legal tender, and Americans were forced or required to turn in their gold or face jail time and also fines. And why he says without compensation is because people exchange their gold for Federal Reserve notes, right? And Federal Reserve notes is not money. It's a debt currency. It's a debt. So that's why he's saying that they confiscated all privately held gold and did so without compensation. The American people were forced to exchange their gold for valueless Federal Reserve notes. The rate of exchange fixed by the government was about 40% below the market price. The total loss to the American economy was approximately $5 billion. All gold exchange was added to the supply in the vaults at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Records show that the total gold supply in the vaults in 1935 was worth about $28 billion, or, 350 billion in today's market. Between 1935 and 1956, most of the nations of the world became indebted to the United States. Most of the indebtedness was incurred when the U.S. furnished aid to its allies during World Wars I and II. Debts between nations have been traditionally satisfied by payments in gold. Thus, our gold supply should have escalated exponentially. A few nations did make payments on their debt, and one or two may have even paid the entire amount. Most, however, delayed payments, and eventually the United States Congress forgave their debt. In any event, by 1956, our gold supplies should have been far in excess of 940 billion. But even if they were not, where is the 80 billion that should have been there? U.S. News and World Report published the following in an article dated February 24th, 1956. U.S. could get into a tight gold supply position if the countries were to decide to withdraw the gold reserves on which they hold claims. In 1953, our gold reserve was 23.3 billion. In 1956, it was down to 21.8 billion. But the other nations hold claim against our gold totaling $13.8 billion. So in an emergency, available for our need is a gold reserve of only 8 billion. Whereas we need 12 billion of gold reserve to pay back our currency, sorry. And so what it's saying there is the gold that we hold, that total was 23, and 13 of the 23 was reserved by other countries. So we only have 8 billion, and we don't even have enough to back our currency. So how could this be when most of the nations in the world owe the United States billions of dollars? How could there ever been a claim against our gold? 13.8 billion over the gold owed the U.S. by the allied nations and the defeated Germany and Japan. Is the U.S. government covering up the theft of U.S. gold by misinforming the public? Okay, so now two more pages. All right, so the answer can be found in a book entitled From Major Jordan's Diaries by George Racy Jordan. There are several other sources which all agree upon the basic facts. Major Jordan recounts in his diary that during a farewell talk with Russian colonel, he was told that a money plane had crashed in Siberia and had to be replaced. A money plane, right? The colonel explained that the U.S. Treasury were shipping engraving plates, ink, and paper and other materials to Russia so that they could print the same occupying money for the Germans as as the United States was printing. So what they're saying, family, is there was a time, or what they're saying is this money plane was carrying the same printing press and the equipment and the paper and all the ink that the Federal Reserve used to print our money here, right? And one key thing to remember, during this time, the money that was being printed was still redeemable for gold. So that's the key piece, right? So the colonel insisted the equipment had been shipped through Great Falls, Montana in May of 1944 in 2 shipments and 5 C-47s each. The shipments had been arranged on the highest level in Washington and the planes had been loaded at Washington National Airport. Years later, a Senate investigation into the scandal found and confirmed the fact that in spite of widespread protests and warnings, Harry Hopkins, Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, however you say that, excuse me for the mispronunciation, U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Averill, and Assistant Secretary to the Treasury, Harry Dexter White, were able to exert enough pressure to see that Russia got the plates. All right, so they did an investigation, family, and they confirmed that the monetary plates that we print money with here, well, not here, but the Federal Reserve prints, were in fact shipped to Russia. So it was confirmed. Later, White was exposed as a Russian agent. Official records show that the photographic plates and all the materials necessary for making high-quality plates and high-quality reproductions were shipped from Washington, D.C. on May 24, 1944. A second shipment to replace the equipment lost in the alleged crash was sent on June 7, 1944. The Red Army set up a shop in former Nazi printing plant in Leipzig and started the presses rolling and rolling and rolling. The Russians insisted upon printing the occupation currency in their own territory where there could be no accountability. They knew that the U.S. Army would convert such currency into dollars. As a result, every Russian printed occupation mark that fell into the hands of an American soldier or accredited civilian became a potential charge against the Treasury of the United States. The Russians paid their own occupation forces with these marks, adding a 2-year bonus for good measure. Excuse me. The American taxpayer footed the bill. By using the occupation currency, which cost them nothing, Russians snapped up anything of value left in the German economy. When they could get purchases out of America, that was even better. By December 1946, the U.S. military government found itself $250 million or more in the red. It had redeemed in dollars at least 2.5 billion marks in excess of total marks issued by its finance office. The deficit could have no other origin than the Russians' plant in Leipzig, Germany. Absolutely, Gerald. Hey, that's coming too. Peace, God. Peace. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We will definitely grow over the 14th Amendment. You're absolutely correct there, sir. Thank you for dropping it in the comments. Harry Dexter White, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, conspired with the Russians to give them the plates, ink, paper, formulas, and the correct serial numbers needed for Russia to print U.S. currency that could be redeemed in gold. So, family, we had a spy, our own government, people within our government gave Russia plates, ink, all the equipment necessary to print U.S. currency that could be redeemed in gold. This could not have been done without the full knowledge and approval of the Secretary of Treasury. Morgenthau and White then treacherously sent 5 plane loads of money plates, paper, and ink to Russia for printing of 5,000 and 10,000 Federal Reserve notes, which could be redeemed in gold. It is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve System to secure the plates. When I asked the Treasury Department to advise me of the whereabouts of those plates, they replied, "We don't know." The United States Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve are very sensitive, even threatening on this issue. And so, family, these plates took missing, and when this guy asked them about them, their response was they don't know where the plates went. This information proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that Senator Joseph McCarthy was absolutely right about the infiltration and takeover of the United States government by communist agents. When these bills printed in Russia were spent into circulation in foreign countries or used in trade, the result was equivalent value of gold directly transferred from Fort Knox to overseas destinations, right? So family, what they're saying, when Russia got their hands on these plates, and they were allowed to print this money. They were allowed to print these money that was redeemable for gold. This gold was put into circulation overseas. And so essentially what they were able to do was they were able to print the money, print the currency that was redeemable for gold, and they ran off with it. They got the gold. They got the gold. That's what this is leading to. Over a period of years, the Treasury was empty of its gold. The bills that reached the Federal Reserve or the Treasury Department were destroyed. And so, so after the gold was redeemed and the bills were sent back, the Treasury Department destroyed the bills. They hiding the evidence. The bills that fell into the hands of the American people and eventually the vaults of the collectors have revealed the greatest gold theft in the history of the world. The proof may be found in the statistics of the U.S. Treasury. Check the Woods Mellon large letter and seal denoting Bank of Issue 5,000 Federal Reserve Notes Series 1928. The record shows that the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston, only 960 were printed, with the first note delivered on November 19, 1929, and the last note delivered on July 26, 1933. Mysteriously, in 1977, the record shows that there are 1,320 of these notes known to exist. The record shows the same notes were printed at the Federal Reserve in San Francisco in the number of 1,224, with the first note delivered on November 19, 1924, and the last note delivered on July 23, 1930. Mysteriously, in 1977, the record shows that there are 51,300 notes known to exist. If you check the Julian letter and seal 10,000 Federal Reserve Notes Series 1934, the record shows that the five Federal Reserve banks in Cleveland, Richmond, Atlanta, Kansas City, and Dallas never issued plates for those notes. Wow. So what they're saying, family, is these notes that were in circulation got printed and they were in circulation, but when you go back to the Federal Reserve banks in Cleveland, Richmond, Atlanta, Kansas City, and Dallas, they were never printed from those banks. They were never printed from those banks. No notes were printed and none were delivered. Mysteriously, in 1977, the record shows that 1,480 exist from Cleveland, 1,200 exist from Richmond, 2,400 exist from Atlanta, 1,200 exist from Kansas City, and 1,200 from Dallas. I have included the documentation of the Treasury that the Treasury does not want you to see. Compare for yourself the number of notes authorized and the number of notes that were actually printed and redeemable for gold. Then you tell me whether the international bankers and the Russians robbed Fort Knox in their plan to enslave the American people. So this is the book, and it has the different dates and all the serial numbers. So essentially, family, you know, we looking at this. Nobody's been able to audit or go into the vaults. The Secretary of Treasury isn't reporting what's in the vaults. And this guy who's an ex-CIA, ex-military, all that good stuff, and not only him, you have other sources that he's giving you the proof that it ain't no gold in Fort Knox. None. No gold at Fort Knox. And that's gonna be bad business, because why that's so important, family, is the world is resetting. The world is resetting to the gold standard. Not just one country, not just the world. The world is resetting to the gold standard. So if that is the case, and the United States don't have no gold, and like I say, I'm just passing what, through my research. So this says we have 8,000 tons. It's multiple sites that said that. He says we ain't got none. So do your own research. But in the event that they don't, The United States is built on debt. It's built on debt. That's been shown. It's built on debt. So if the world resets to a gold standard and the United States corporation, let's make that very clear, don't have any gold, then what happens? Because the United States corporation been bankrupt. So I put this together. And even if let's say we do have the 8,100 tons in Fort Knox. Let's say it is there, right? So the U.S. debt versus the U.S. gold. 1 ton is 2,000 pounds, 1 pound 16 ounces, and right now 1 ounce of gold is a little over $1,300 an ounce, right? And so you see the math, you see the equation. So that equates to, excuse me, almost 340 billion. We'll just round it up, right? And so $340 billion. So the national debt is $22 trillion. Even if we did, as a country, have the 8,100 tons of gold, we do not have enough gold to pay off a fraction of the debt. A fraction. Because just to put it in perspective, this is the delta. Even if you take, too fast. Even if you take all the gold, this is what we have. The 300 and we'll round up to $340 billion in gold, right? That still leaves well over $21 trillion of debt that has to be paid out, right? And so just to put it in perspective, family, $1 trillion is 9,099,999,999 plus a dollar. You get what I'm saying? So there is no way in the hell that they will, even if they had the gold, they could not pay off all the people that own the debt. The U.S. corporation don't have enough gold to pay off $1 trillion. So they can't even pay off Japan. They can't even pay off Japan. They don't have enough gold to scratch the surface of the amount of debt that's out there. So Japan got 1.13 trillion. China got 1.11 trillion. Ireland, 271 billion. Cayman Islands, 262. And this is the Treasury bond. So how are they going to pay this? How are they going to pay this? How are they going to pay this? All right, so just a quick recap. The U.S. corporation does not own enough gold to pay a fraction of the national debt. And the world, listen, the world right now is holding up the U.S. dollar. But the world is tired of the U.S. dollar. They're tired of the government. So the world is resetting to gold. The world is resetting to gold. So as American people, what do you think we need to be doing? Resetting the goal. So got a short video here just talking about the next upcoming economic crash. And so now we're in the midst of it.
My team and I always had
before
trouble
I get into
managing
that,
our tasks until one of my colleagues found Monday.com. You can
I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes to illustrate to you how it is mathematically possible for the greatest crash in human history to occur this year. Let me begin. On October 4th, we warned the world that the U.S. stock markets topped and a great crash is about to begin in this video. And in addition, we uploaded numerous other videos, many of which went viral, warning the world of what is about to come. Within those videos, we presented what is called a rising wedge, and what happens when the wedge breaks, how a violent market sell-off can occur, and specifically how this rising wedge correlates directly to the crash of 1987, where the markets crashed 37%. Additionally, how this rising wedge directly correlates also to the great crash of 1929, where the markets crashed 49%. Now let's look at these charts, the crash of 1929, and the crash of 1987 in closer detail. In the crash of 87, we added this blue line. Now, from the initial crash point, Down. The markets in 1987 crashed a total of 10% on the initial crash. Following the initial crash, the markets retraced 70% back up, and that was then followed by a massive market plunge of 37%. Next, let's look at the crash of 1929. Again, we draw in this blue line, and from the top, the initial crash was 17% compared to the 10% crash of 1987. So this was a deeper crash that occurred. Following the crash, the markets then retraced back up 60%. And following the retrace, then the markets reversed and plunged 50% off the top. Next, let's see how this all correlates. Here's a chart that we have labeled the Great Crash of 2018-19. What you'll notice, this point here was the exact top we forecast within the video. From this initial crash point, we were looking for a crash into the month of December, which exactly occurred. That crash ended up being a 19% crash. This crash will end up being the first leg down. Since the crash, the markets have reversed back up. Sound familiar? That is exactly what happened in 1929 and in 1987. Once this reversal ends, which the U.S. markets now are getting into extreme heavy resistance here at 24,000 on the Dow, we should very shortly expect a price reversal and then a market plunge, just as we witnessed in the year 1987 and again in 1929. However, this plunge is going to be much, much worse. Let me explain. We live in biblical times. In December of 2018, the initial crash was the opening of the third seal within Revelation. This initial crash took the market down 19%. Using this 19% initial crash number, we can potentially calculate the magnitude of the great crash that's about to happen. Let's look in detail at the math. Once again, the initial crash in 1987 was 10%. The initial crash in 1929 was 17%. And the initial crash into December was 19%. You'll notice the numbers are getting bigger. Now, off the initial 10% crash in 87, the markets then retraced 70% to ultimately crash 35%. Now, if we compare that to the crash of 1929, you'll notice the initial crash was 17%, followed by a lesser retrace of only 60%, and then ultimately ended up being a bigger crash. Notice, the bigger the percentage drop, the less the retracement, the bigger the drop. Now, let's compare that to current. You'll notice last year the crash was 19%, and as of the 9th of October, the markets have retraced 44%, currently trading at approximately 24,000.
It's up over there now, family.
Down. Now, should the markets retrace 50%, that would take the markets approximately 400 points higher, with a 19% crash on the initial leg down. Potentially a 44% retracement to 24,000 is sufficient. However, should the markets retrace higher, 24,400 would be 50% retracement. The point being is we should not expect a 60% retracement because the initial crash leg was greater than the prior two crashes. At maximum, we would probably expect a 50% retracement. However, 44% is currently sufficient as well. Therefore, any retracement between current levels and up to 50% is considered expected. Now, from this retracement level between 44 to say 50%, this is where it starts to get scary. If we look at the crash of 87, a 10% initial drop took it down 35%. A 17% crash in 1929 took it down 50%. Therefore, this present crash that began on October 4th, the initial leg down was 19%, so we minimum should see a greater than 50% crash on the plunge. If the crash is 50%, that would take the Dow down to 13,500 for a low. On the other hand, if it's supposed to be greater than 50%, we should at minimum expect 12,000 on the Dow on this crash. Should the crash go 60%, it would be 11,000, and 65% would be 10,000. Therefore, because of the 19% initial crash, this crash on the plunge should at minimum take the Dow down to 12,000, a 55% crash
because it needs to be mathematically greater than 50%. In other words, greater than the crash of 1929. And a 55% crash would end up being the greatest market crash in human history. Again, we are in the midst of the collapse right now. Please, we've warned numerous times, be sure to have silver and or gold, food and water for at least 2 months. And most importantly, this is a biblical crash. These are biblical times. Faith in the Father and his Son, Jesus.
So what you're saying is that the markets are about to crash.
Right.
Everybody's going to lose faith in the stock market, and the money's going to flow up and go to Bitcoin, the alternate coins, gold and silver. We're going to have a massive financial shift.
A surprise gold rush, the likes of which the world has never seen, is at the doorstep in the greatest wealth transfer in human history. Please, the wise man foresees the difficulties ahead and prepares. The fool goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Be wise. May God bless you and your entire family.
All right, family. So you see it. So that's the analytical side of it. So excuse me. So pretty much what he's showing. So I traded the foreign exchange market for for a couple of years. Took a break. Haven't been doing it here lately, but excuse me. Based on those numbers, the next economic crash is going to far surpass anything that we've ever seen. So 2008 was bad for a lot of people, right? But like I said, the government could not let the economy crash because it would have crashed the world. So now what he just said with the Dow and that what's called a pullback up to that 24,400, that has already taken place. And so what did it was when the Feds recently, I think it was the middle of last week, the Feds chose not to raise the interest rates. So since they are not raising the interest rates, that is going to delay the economy going down, right? And so I want you to start paying attention, even if you really don't fully understand what the charts mean, et cetera, et cetera. When you start hearing that the Feds or the Federal Reserve is about to raise interest rates, hold on to your seat, because that's when things are going to start happening, right? And so now let's check this out to see what hyperinflation would look like.
It's not easy being a dictator. For one, there's a lot of other people around you who would love to be you, so you're constantly worrying about staying in power. Navigating the gray area between political rivals and political allies is a total headache. Plus, there's all those pesky people who you're supposed to be in charge of. How to give them as little as possible without inciting rebellion is a never-ending balancing act. Robert Mugabe, the president of Zimbabwe, was facing these problems around 2000. He needed money to bribe his enemies and reward his allies. Unfortunately, he had taxed pretty much everything there was to tax, and his policies had scared away investors. The economy wasn't doing well, and his people were unemployed and hungry. So, where to get the money? Well, one of the perks of running a country is that you get your very own money-making machine, the printing presses. So, in a pinch, you can just print more money, which is exactly what Mugabe did. The newly printed money didn't increase productivity in the Zimbabwean economy, and there was no new investment, so the economy couldn't produce more goods. In effect, you had more money chasing the same goods. More money chasing the same goods meant that the purchasing power of the Zimbabwean dollar fell. You needed more dollars to buy the same stuff as before. In other words, as the newly printed money began flooding the market, prices began to rise. Prices began to increase at a rate of about 50% a year, and that was only the beginning. As prices rose, the government had to print even more money to buy just as many goods as before. And so they did. And that is how things got out of control. The faster prices rose, the more money the government printed. And the faster prices rose. A feedback loop. By 2001, prices were rising at a rate of 100% per year. By 2002, 200% per year. 2003, 600% per year. By 2006, prices were rising at over 1,000% per year. And it cost 417 Zimbabwean dollars to buy toilet paper. No, not per roll. $417 per sheet. Money was devaluing so quickly that the money you had in the morning would be worth quite a bit less by the evening. So people were trying to get rid of currency as soon as they got it. Zimbabweans became millionaires, but unfortunately, $1 million Zimbabwe dollars might buy you a chicken if you were lucky. And still the government kept printing money, and in higher and higher denominations. $1 million notes, 100 million, 10 billion, $100 billion notes. In 2008, prices started rising by thousands of percent a month, and the government started printing $100 trillion notes. At the height of this feedback, prices were increasing at an astronomical rate of 7.6 billion% a month. And $1 would get you, well, we're not sure how to say it, but this many Zimbabwean dollars. By the end of 2008, the Zimbabwean dollar had effectively ceased to exist. Mugabe had no choice but to legalize transactions in foreign currencies. The Zimbabwe hyperinflation was over. Hyperinflations have occurred in other countries such as Yugoslavia in 1994, China in 1949, and Germany in 1923. As in Zimbabwe, these hyperinflations were caused by governments.
Everybody was on that list except for the U.S.
With few means to raise funds except the printing press. The Zimbabwe hyperinflation also illustrates a more general principle that we will be exploring and testing in greater detail in upcoming videos. And that is, inflation is caused by increases in the supply of money. You're on your way to mastering economics. Make sure this video sticks by taking...
All right, that one was short and sweet. So, like you just said, inflation is due to the increase of the supply, right? And so, like we see, the Federal Reserve, they print, millions of dollars a day. The printing presses is just going. They just printing. And so, just keep in mind that, it's supply and demand. So we have the supply. We have the however many millions and trillions of dollars that's in reserves, and the Federal Reserve is still printing. So the excuse me, family. So the supply, excuse me, ready to get over this little cold. Excuse me. So the supply is already through the roof. But if you don't have a demand, then what we just saw, excuse me, what we just saw is very real. And especially if what the brother said out of this book, if there's no goal, then you can hang it up. You can hang it up. If there is no goal to keep this country afloat, you can hang it up. And so you can't look for, we may be thinking that the government come bail us out. How? So again, as countries continue to replace the U.S. dollar with gold, the supply of the dollar will go up, and the demand will go down, and the value of the dollar will decrease until it's not worth anything, right? And so just a final summary of everything that we went over. Per the Constitution, lawful money is gold and silver. States are in the process of passing laws, reinstating and making gold and silver legal tender again. Per law, money is gold, silver, or paper money. The gold and silver certificates, paper money backed by gold. Per law, the U.S. dollar is a debt currency and has no value. Per law, gold and silver is real money and is stable and or increases in value. The Federal Reserve is a debt system. Income tax is used to pay interest on government loans. Multiple countries own U.S. debt via treasury bonds. The U.S. corporation is $1 trillion in debt. Social Security benefits are forecasted to be non-existent by 2034. Social Security funds are used for non-Social Security purposes. The federal government spends excess Social Security funds not paid to current beneficiaries in the general fund. Excess printing of fiat currency has failed in this country before. The Continental collapsed, right? The US dollar is currently the world's reserve currency, right? Countries are removing the US dollar as the reserve currency and replacing with gold. Countries are liquidating US Treasury bonds. Countries are finding alternate currencies to do international trading and cutting out the US dollar. The US corporation does not own enough gold to pay a fraction of their national debt. Based on the mathematics, we are in the midst of the largest economic crash in history, and hyperinflation, family, is very real. Hyperinflation is very real, right? And so that's why, when I talk about the securing the resources, now is the time to prepare. Now is the time to start acquiring your gold, start acquiring your silver, start taking the means and learning how to grow your own food, because the Federal Reserve knows that fiat currency, you won't be able to take that to the store. You won't have enough to get it. You understand what I'm saying? And so this is just a little quote. Gold is money. Everything else is credit. That's from J.P. Morgan, the J.P. Morgan Bank, 1912. This is Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan was once the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Gold still represents the ultimate form of payment in the world. Fiat money, in extremis, is accepted by nobody. Gold is always accepted. So family, really what I wanted to bring home is everybody need to be getting gold and silver in their house, and get on a gold savings plan. So you may ask where to get the gold. You can get your gold from a couple places. You can get your gold and silver from JM Bullion. You can get your gold and silver from AppMex. Me, myself, and my family, I opened up a free gold savings account. All of my family, we got free gold savings accounts with Karatbars International. So, excuse me. And so Karatbars has created a global gold ecosystem. It's a legal tender in private commerce. So when I say private commerce, everything outside of government and government agencies is considered private. So what that means, if you wanted to, let's use the post office, for example. If you wanted to use gold, since South Carolina is making gold and silver a tender and payments of debts, if you wanted to use gold as a payment to the post office, for an example, you would have to use gold coin minted by the United States, right? American Gold Eagle or some other coin with the U.S. seal on it, right? But everything outside of the government and government agencies is considered private commerce, right? And so Karatbars is recognized in 130 plus countries and counting. They issue 999.9% pure 24 karat currency grade gold. You can get it in increments of 1/10 of a gram up to 5 gram weights. And see why that's important is because an ounce of gold is $1,300. I make decent money for what I do, but I don't have $1,300 that I can just don't need to live off of, because you can only save what you don't need to live off of. So by me being able to get it, I can get a gram, a couple grams a month, a couple grams, like I said, a couple grams a week here and there, or whatever. Being able to acquire gold in those smaller increments works for me, right? And so Karatbars Gold is certified by the London Bullion Market Association. So the LBMA is the world's trade center for gold bullion. It's based in London, and you have to have a gold membership with those guys, and it's global. It's a global membership, and so the LBMA holds those gold refineries to the highest standards as it relates to the quality and weight accuracy. And Karatbars got the first gold-backed cryptocurrency and the first gold crypto bank. So that's why I plugged into it. So infinitely, if you want to hear more about getting gold from Karatbars, I will do another live. What time is it? It is what time is it, family? I think it's about 1:30, but I'll probably go live around 6 or 6:30 just to share Karatbars with people. If you want to sign up to get your free gold savings account, you can. If not, you can use one of the other alternatives to get your gold. But definitely start getting some gold and silver in your household. So can't leave without showing love. So I'm gonna show some love to the family. So Destiny Speaks Coaching and Consulting. You can connect and reach in via Facebook Messenger. So the leaders of this beautiful group is the creator and David and April Bynes. And so Brother Bynes, when I first started my spiritual journey, he was the one that helped guide me through the process, helped open up my eye, helped expand my mind to a new wave of thinking. And I mean, he's opening up the spirits, minds, and hearts of people. Him and his wife does marriage counseling. He does mastermind groups for growth and development, and so much more. So if that's something you're interested in, please look up Destiny Speaks Coaching and Consulting on Facebook to like the page, see what they're doing if you're interested and want to work with David and April Bynes. By all means, inbox them and connect accordingly. All right, now this is the fam, Mental Magic, Omniverse City. So man, you're talking about opening up the spirits and minds and hearts of people, saving and protecting souls, really, the family that I look at that's really fighting the spiritual battle, the spiritual warfare, breaking these spells. And the most important thing is reconnecting the indigenous Americans with their ancestors and their culture. Creating a new language, teaching a new language, and the spirit behind different sacred symbols, etc. So it's just a lot growing on within the Mental Magic family. So to my Moors, and when I say Moors, whether you consider yourself Black, African American, colored, any of those things is welcome to you. And it's something for everybody, honestly. If you have a soul, Mental Magic is for you. And Frank may correct me on that, but anyway. But if you want to enroll, Google Mental Magic, check it out. And if you want to enroll, send a message or email them at mentalmagicomniversecity@gmail.com. The leaders is the creator, obviously, and Frank and Tiffany Burrell. Third Eye High, Facts Over Feelings. So this is Jermaine Farmer Bay. He's one of the guys that I've been connected with and following for a long time. You're talking about for all your truth trafficking needs on history in general, but most infinitely history as it relates to in regards to Moors and overall political moves that are being made. Man, reach in, follow his page. He done maxed out on friend requests, so you'll just have to catch it when they go live and people sharing. That definitely a true representation of a Moor standing on the square, humble and cares about the people in the future generation. So again, Jermaine Bay, Mr. Morlock Holmes, Mr. Facts Over Feelings, definitely follow, share, and donate to that brother. And Islam to any of the other brothers out there sharing truth. Messiah Ali, Dice Raul, it's so many people out there that's trying to get the information to the people. So I give thanks for all of y'all. Also, Honestly Alkaline, man, if you want some one-on-one consultations, not consultations, because we ain't conning nobody. So if you want a one-on-one consultation on your health, how to eat healthy, et cetera, you can Google some stuff, but it really helps to be able to speak to someone and also get some FaceTime with someone who has done their due diligence, that knows about health, that knows how the body works, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing. You can get some all-natural deodorant. My family and I have been using this deodorant for several months now. I don't even get a body odor anymore, and it's healthy. So if you think about it and do your own research, you have a lot of deodorants that has aluminum and all these other metals that has been linked to causing breast cancer. I know when I was using store-bought deodorants, I used to get maybe a knot up under my arm or something like that. That hasn't happened since I've been using a deodorant. You can also get some eternal water. So reach into them. The leaders of this beautiful organization is obviously the creator and Frank and Faith James. So reach in and connect with them via Facebook. Right here is the Empress Shauna, Victory Gardens, Lovely Treasures. Man, you talking about the Emperor Frank Burrell said it the best is hand and heart crafted. I had said hand crafted, but it's hand and heart crafted copper jewelry, right? And so if you don't know much about copper, copper is an energetic conductor, providing energetic healing, cleansing, and purifying. And so, you know, I'm a floss the, you know, this one right here. That's personally owned, and these are my Empress's earrings that I got for her made. So not only does the copper have energy, you got other stones and other arrows and other things that the Empress Shauna puts in there that offers, you know, some spiritual protection and elevating of your frequency. So if that's something that interests you, definitely reach in and pronate with Shauna and place your order, Shauna McHenry. And get you some jewelry, man. Get you some original jewelry. You know what I'm saying? And last on the list, I got my brother Malik Kareem Bey, Bird's Eye View Contract Solutions. So Malik has an assortment of things that he's doing, family. He does credit repair, and man, and that's just this is just one of his many results where he's done work for people. And within a week or two after he does his magic, I mean, people credit scores increases anywhere from 75, 150 to 200 points. You understand what I'm saying? And so this is one thing that I know a lot of us need. A lot of people need credit repair. You know, whether it be old student loans, old credit cards, whatever. Reach into the brother Malik Kareem Bey. And get your credit repair fixed. I've used him personally for a family member of mine. You know, he also offers trade lines, and what a trade line is once he repairs your credit, so essentially all your old default debt will come off your credit report. And if you're a person trying to rebuild your credit, you can use what's called a trade line, and a trade line is essentially using someone who has a good standing account and good credit, and you can use their credit pretty much to help boost your credit score. So just another option. Man, he has a soursop tea. Definitely Google soursop and review the multitude of health benefits. Reach into them, place your order, get you some. And man, I was talking to the brother the other day. If you look at the top, he has all these different herbs that he's going to be coming out with soon. And really, why that's so important to me, and I'll use my daughter for example. I took my daughter to the doctor a couple weeks ago. She, was getting headaches, and they wouldn't go away. So she had a headache for about 2 weeks. And when I spoke with the doctor, I was like, well, can we do something that's more natural, or and she was like, well, we could try something, but. She was instantly to say, well, don't use any CBD or anything like that, something that's actually natural. But instead, she wants to prescribe, my daughter a pill that she has to take every day, one pill that she has to take every day, and then gave her a second pill that, okay, if that doesn't work on the headache, then take this one in combination with a third one. So you want to issue my baby 3 pills that she needs to take instead of us getting back to the earthy remedies. So that's why I love what that brother is doing, man. So that's it for today, family. Let me end the slideshow. Stop the share. Ooh-wee. All right, family. So that's it, man. We done. I give thanks to everybody that tuned in. More and more to you. Peace. And yeah, man, most infinitely, get your gold and silver. Like I said, wherever you get it from, whether you get it from JM Bullion, Ampex, Karatbars, and once I do that presentation, if you're interested, definitely get plugged in, get you a free gold savings account, and move forward. But family, the world is resetting to gold. The world is resetting to gold. And so one thing that we've noticed and that we've seen is that anytime the banks or the government makes wrong decisions, whether it's printing more money or whatever, they make these decisions. And it's always the American people that pay for those decisions. So the 2008 crash, that was done because banks were issuing loans to people that they know they were not qualified for, that they knew they would default on, right? And so with that being the case, taxpayers, though that bailout money, so the same people that caused the problem got bailed out. So let me ask you this: when the economy crashed in 2008, the people that lost jobs, the people that lost houses, the people that lost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, did the government give you anything? Did they come to your rescue? No, because it's all about big business, and we have to get back to a place to where we are taking care of ourselves. We are self-sufficient, right? And so that's it. That's it. More and more, Shy, more and more. Yep. So most infinitely, man, I'm gonna get out of here, and I'll definitely be back on the live later, probably around 6 or 6:30, to share Karatbars, the global gold ecosystem, how you can get your gold, et cetera, et cetera. So I love y'all. Thank y'all. I'm gonna go eat, man. I haven't eaten any breakfast or lunch. So peace, family. Peace.